So how's the situation in North Carolina right now?
In terms of, we have so many situations here.
In terms of the pandemic right now.
Oh.
So can you go outside? Can you go to cafes and grocery stores? And
so, yes, we have, the state has asked everybody, and most of the stores require you to wear a face mask when you go inside. Most of the restaurants have opened, limited seating, and those who can, of course, seat you outside. But in North Carolina, and I know Berlin gets hot too, we get in the summer, you don't have it as bad, Robbie, in Black Mountain, but in Durham, in the Raleigh-Durham area, we have days that are in the 90s. So sitting outside is not always pleasant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're starting to gradually open up, but we have a long way to go still. Yeah, but I think we're slowing down. The rate's slowing down.
That's good. Yeah, yeah. It's similar here with the face masks, and
Oh yeah,
most restaurants are only outside seating. So now everybody's talking about it's already cooling down. What's going to happen in the winter?
Everybody will be sitting out in coats.
Well, the beauty shops are not open yet, and that's a problem for me because I need to get a haircut and a permanent. I had my husband cutting my hair. I hope it looks okay.
Yeah. And Roberta, I see in your background there's a lot of books and notes. Is that all from your activist work, or?
Well, I haven't written any books, but I have collected a lot of them. But I am working on publishing a book about some of my activities over the last half century. And I have a scholar, a feminist scholar, who lives in Louisiana, who's going to help me with that.
Nice.
That should be fun.
Maybe we can actually, I know I sent you the questions in a little bit of a different order, but I think it would be nice to start with how you each got involved with the ERA. So if you say you've been involved for 50 years, I think you have a lot to say, but maybe you can, just shortly tell me each one after the other how you got involved. And because I had an interview with Jessica Neuvert from the ERA Coalition.
Oh, Jessica, yes.
And she told me how, this ERA Coalition started 5 or 6 years ago and is kind of like this new wave of the ERA movement. So I'm just curious, like, when did you get involved, before or now, and how does this new wave look like?
Robbie, why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start. Well, I have been a feminist since the age of 12. That was a time when my mother was passed over for a promotion. She worked in a supermarket for many years, and the owner hired instead a bag boy because he just felt it had to be a man and wanted to hire from within. So Mom was pretty philosophical about that, but it really lit a fire in me. It made me a feminist right away. So then I read The Second Sex while I was in my 20s and began to advocate for women's rights from then on. In 1972 is when the Equal Rights Amendment came out of Congress and went to the states. That's when I became active for the ERA. And at first I thought it was going to be very easy to pass. Living in Louisiana, we were so naive.
You were living in Louisiana at the time?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
And we lived there 41 years.
Is that where you're from?
Naive, but since that time, the ERA movement has gotten a lot more sophisticated, and some of us are more cynical. I know now that putting an amendment into the Constitution is going to be a very long haul, but we're well organized now. And I'm 83 years old, and I want to live long enough to see this happen.
Yeah. And how did you, when you say you got involved in 1972 when it passed, so it was a big deal, I guess it was all over the news, but how did it affect you personally?
It affected me personally, and I guess it has for many, many years. Many of the jobs that I've had, I knew that my pay was not equal with that of men. And at that time, though, in 1972, I was working for the YWCA, and so although it was very low pay, I did think it was fair.
Yeah. What were you doing there?
at the YWCA?
Yeah.
Well, I had a lot of different jobs, the YW in Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission was and is now eliminating racism, empowering women. And that's
Mm-hmm.
really my own personal mission as well. So I was doing a lot of different jobs. The last one I had at the YWCA, and I worked there for many years, was the director of social and racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that.
Yeah. So you were a professional activist, maybe you could say that.
Yeah, right. I got paid, not paid very well, but I got paid for a while.
Yeah. And in the 70s, what did that involvement around the ERA look like? How is it different from now?
Well, in Louisiana, where I lived at that
Yeah.
time, you know, we went to the legislature. We talked to the legislators about it. We wrote articles for the newspaper, the same kind of things that we do now, really, in many ways. But we did not have a huge organization. And right now, I think we do have a pretty strong organization in the unratified states and also nationally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what type of organization was that in Louisiana? Was it a similar ERA coalition, or what was it?
Yeah, it was similar to that, but you know, it's brand new to most of us. We had never been to the legislature before. We really didn't know what we were doing. Fortunately, we did find a very good friend, the president of the AFL-CIO in Louisiana, Victor Busey, latched onto our cause, and he said, you know, you're right. And labor unions had not been for the ERA for a while. They claimed that women had special benefits in legislation, and so they wanted to keep it that way. I think Vic was much more visionary, and he realized that the Equal Rights Amendment needs to happen. So he did everything he could to help us, but of course it wasn't enough because the legislature was pretty backward.
And is Louisiana, sorry, I don't have an overview of all the states. Did Louisiana ratify the ERA in the end? No.
It'll probably be a very long time. Mississippi will probably be the very last, and Louisiana maybe the next to the last. I'm just hoping North Carolina will be up in the top third.
But yeah, unfortunately, how does it feel for you that you invested so much time in Louisiana and it still hasn't passed, you know? And then we can talk about North Carolina later on.
How did it feel to work on it so long and not get it passed? Well, it's very discouraging. You know, when we first thought that it was going to be easy to do, that was quite a shock to many of us. We were pretty young and pretty naive. But, you know, now we see more. We understand better what the system is like. And the fact is, you know, it's pretty much a patriarchy. And so we're dealing with that. But fortunately, there are some men, some legislators who are on our side. And some lobbyists like Victor Busey from the AFL-CIO, who is very much on our side. Steve Anderson, who is from Virginia, who is the Republican who helped get the Equal Rights Amendment passed in Virginia. So we have some good men to help us.
So you feel like you need the men to get it done?
I beg your pardon?
You need the men to get it done?
No, we need both. We need men and women. We need a lot more women elected. And I think that will probably happen in North Carolina this time. There are a lot of good women running. And so I think that will make a difference. But we need men and women to be for equal rights because, you know, it affects all of us. It's not the ERA for women. It's the ERA to do away with sex discrimination.
Yeah.
What's interesting is there was a recent article that was talking about ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And as we look at the 100-year ratification of the 19th Amendment, when white women only, of course, sadly, were given the right to vote. But the commentary was, the reality is women will fight and we will legislate, we will lobby, and we will find male allies. But we do not have a majority power in any government except one. Nevada is the only state in our country where there is a majority female legislature. So without male allies and support, women, we can scream and yell and do everything we want to do, but we have to have their votes because we don't have a majority anywhere. And that is, as Roberta said, that's something we've got to change.
Yeah.
You know, we've got to get women equally represented in our legislatures. You know, you've had a prime minister in Germany, an amazing woman, with Angela Merkel, and you know, here's the United States who touts democracy very strongly, and yet we haven't even had a female vice president. The most powerful woman that we have in our country right now is our Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
And even in Germany, the number of women, or the percentage of women in parliament is the lowest since 15 years now, I think.
Yeah, so one step forward.
We're also working on that, on having a quota to have 50-50 women, men, and I don't know how it is in the House or in the Senate.
In our US
this is an issue, even though you have a woman on top, doesn't mean that.
In our U.S. House, we have about 25% women.
Right,
30. So,
over what it was, but we have a long way to go. And so there are organizations working on that. Emily's List, which stands for, Emily is early money. It makes it makes the yeast rise. Money, it makes the yeast rise. In other words, it brings in money, and it helps the woman get an early start in her campaign. We have a similar one in North Carolina called Lillian's List. And so the whole idea is just to help women get elected, good women, you know, pro-ERA women.
And Lori, how did you get involved with, or since when are you involved with the ERA?
Well, you know, it's always interesting. I tell this story that when I was in high school, so I'm a few years younger than Robbie, but I was a kid who was very observant. I have two brothers, but I'm the oldest of four. And I was always very observant that when I would watch television, the only time I saw women, they were housewives, they were secretaries, teachers, and I observed this as well in my community. And I was one of those kids that I loved adventure books, and I wanted to go and do things. And I didn't see girls doing it, except for a very popular Nancy Drew, who was she was a girl detective, because you had to always put a qualifier. You couldn't just be a detective. You had to be a girl detective. But in high school, I graduated in 1971. So this was right at the height of our legislation for the Equal Rights Amendment. And my English teacher, a very interesting progressive woman, decided she'd teach us about debating. So I was the pro-ERA debate champ, and I debated the head cheerleader who was anti-ERA.
Oh, wow. What year was this?
This was in 1971.
Oh, so right before it, right? And the height of the debate,
Everything with all the noise. And of course, the arguments then are some of the same arguments that we hear now, that the Equal Rights Amendment would destroy some of the benefits that women, or protections, I should say, that women have. Women would be drafted. We'd have to share bathrooms. Women would get child support and alimony, and the list goes on and on. And it's interesting, this woman, this girl I went to high school with, is now a district attorney in South Carolina. So she obviously went and pursued her dreams. But I started.
Yeah. But how did the crowd react there?
So again, it was very interesting. I would say the majority of the boys in my class were, you know, to them it didn't really mean a whole lot. They didn't see the impact for themselves. And of course, this was still during the Vietnam War, so the draft was still in place. There was a lot of concern there. But I became really active in the equal rights movement after I retired. So I spent 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry and traveled extensively. Had a very, very demanding job. So I supported financially, but I was not able to dedicate the time. And I retired 4 years ago. I'm doing the math here, almost 5 years ago, and just jumped in with both feet.
Yeah.
And said, I want this for my daughter. I have a granddaughter. I want to see them in the Constitution. That's kind of my overriding belief. So I tell people I'm fighting for them now. And like Robbie, I want to see this before I go. I mean, really.
But do you, and this is a question for both of you, do you feel like, no judgment at all, but do you feel like between the 82 when the deadline passed and now when it revived in 2017, 2016, did you feel like you also a little bit maybe forgot about it, or somehow was it gone, or was it still there? Were you still reading about it and talking about it and working, organizing?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents and then Robbie jump in. I was, and on a personal standpoint, I had children very young, and then I went back to college, and I was so consumed with a business career where doors were opening. And for women in this country, and probably similar in Germany, in the mid to late 70s, the doors were opening for us. We were being hired in jobs that have traditionally been male jobs. So we were seeing progress. And while we were all disappointed, there was this feeling like, well, things are moving in the right direction. So, okay. And that was kind of how it was, sort of on a back burner. I don't think people completely forgot about it, but we, like many of us, were all busy living our lives, and we were seeing advances. We were seeing women in jobs we'd never seen them before. We were seeing them being elected to Congress. But it was a false sense of security. By the time the mid-'80s, we started seeing a backlash and started seeing certain rights being rolled back or forgotten about. Robbie?
Yeah, I've had pretty much that same experience. I've never gave up on the Equal Rights Amendment. Even when we thought all was lost in 1978, I thought, all right, we're going to start all over. We're going to do whatever we have to do. But it was finally when, I think it was 1992, the 27th Amendment actually became part of the Constitution. It dealt with congressional pay raises. And that took 203 years to get through the process. And so we began to realize, hey, if that can pass, if that can become part of the Constitution after 203 years, we should not be bound by that deadline. And so that's about the time when the new wave began. And
in 1992, you say?
1992. That's when it was. The 27th Amendment. It dealt with congressional pay raises. It was a good amendment, and it passed without much difficulty when it finally came to their attention after 203 years. That's what's wrong with the patriarchy. They don't focus on the important things.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can turn to North Carolina more specifically, because I was very curious. I read about it and researched the movement and the ratifications in the different states in the last 3 years, and then I was surprised to see that there's some states, even though we have already these 38 states that have ratified it, who are still working on ratification. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about why it's important for North Carolina to ratify and how you're working on that currently.
Shall I start?
Sure, go ahead, Robbie.
Okay, well, North Carolina, to our shame, did not actually ratify the 19th Amendment, which was the suffrage amendment, until 1971. We were the next to the last state to do so. Mississippi was the last. And, we have a saying here in many southern states, thank God for Mississippi. It keeps us from being the last one. But our state was once considered fairly progressive. and it's gotten pretty backward during the last couple of decades.
Mm.
But there are a lot of groups active now in North Carolina working very hard to overcome systemic racism, for example, to improve our educational system, which was once great among the southern states, and of course to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. We think that that'll demonstrate that Americans all over the nation really want this to happen, constitutional equality.
Mm.
So the polls show that, but this would be another way to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, I'm just trying to write some notes while I listen.
Sure.
I'm also recording the Zoom, by the way, but just for so that I can, review it later.
Let me ask you, you're recording it. Would it be possible for you to share the recording with us?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Love to have that.
Yeah.
We'd appreciate it.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, and what is the situation like in North? I mean, we have the election coming up. What are you working on to achieve in the state until then, or what are the campaign kind of are you trying to do right now?
Well, it's interesting that we have a lot of activities. Of course, our saying all the time is COVID ruins everything, just as I'm sure people in Germany say something similar. So we have, North Carolina has a very interesting legislative process. It's based on odd and even years. And in even years, we have what's called short session, which is usually focused on getting the budget done. And then the odd years are when legislation is introduced and voted on, debated, et cetera. So we're in what's called a short session year. We did actually have a bill ready to go to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, but due to COVID, due to the fact that even the legislature had to quarantine, we made a decision that there was too many other things to focus on this year for our legislature budget-wise, and that we would gear up and get ready for 2021. So we have had two amazing, a senator and a representative who have been our sponsors. And in fact, when I get off this call, I'm going to be talking to one of our representatives who has brought the bill forward every year. And in fact, last year we had every single Democrat in both the House and the Senate in North Carolina sign on to support the Equal Rights Amendment. But we're nonpartisan. Okay, so we're nonpartisan nonprofit. So we can't come out and support a candidate who's pro-ERA and say, oh gosh, vote for so-and-so. But one of the things that we are doing is a new initiative. We're working with a national group called Vote Equality US, and we're tailoring this for North Carolina. And so we're going to really be advocating for candidates who support equal rights. Our campaign, we've got a new logo. We're going to have yard signs, magnets. We're going to do a postcard mailing out to particularly independents, people who are kind of unsure or maybe don't even know what's going on with the Equal Rights Amendment. We send out newsletters. We participate in talks. I mean, we're being asked to talk at a number of different organizations across the state. And we let them know what is happening both nationally as well as locally and what they can do to support it. So as I always like to tell people, it's amazing what you can do remotely, as here we all are. And we're trying to make sure that people don't forget, because there's been a lot of noise about the Equal Rights Amendment after Virginia passed this past January. And we are very determined that North Carolina is going to have this bill in January, and we're going to be there. So, and I know Robbie has something that she can tell you a little bit about what we do as well.
Oh, yes. This summer we did a survey of all the legislative candidates as well as North Carolina candidates running for the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House. It was about 400 people all in all, counting all those candidates. We sent them a letter and included a postcard. The letter explained what the Equal Rights Amendment is and what we were asking them to do. And the postcard for legislative candidates said, yes, I will co-sponsor and support the Equal Rights Amendment. And there was a stamped postcard enclosed. And so we had to make some phone calls and encourage them to please send that postcard back, because they have a lot of things going on during a campaign. And that's probably not the first thing they noticed. But we got back from legislative candidates around 40%, which was pretty good. We had done this thing before a couple of years earlier, and this was a better response. And most of them said yes. Republicans and Democrats said yes, I'll co-sponsor and support the Equal Rights Amendment.
40% said yes.
Yes, well, almost all. There were a few of them who said no, or a couple of them who said, I'm not certain, I need more information. And one person wrote back and said, well, you don't need a law, all you need is the law of God. But he didn't sign his name, so we don't know what to do.
Were they all, or were they mostly women, or was it equal?
No, men and women.
Yeah.
There were some women who were against, but most of them were for.
Yeah.
And most of the responses were yes, which was very encouraging.
Yeah.
So we put that on our website, and we were telling people about it, telling people to please check, before you vote, take a look and find out what is their position on this issue. There are probably other issues that are important to you as well, but this one is important.
Yeah, yeah. And so I imagine also that in an election year, there's a lot more movement also in your organization. So do you feel like there's a lot of people who are now joining your activities, either remotely or by buying stamps, or I don't know, not stamps,
magnets
or
buttons,
all these things. Do you feel like a lot is happening this year, or is it kind of similar to the previous years?
I think this year we've actually done quite a bit. We have our annual meeting coming up in October, which will be done via Zoom. That's usually a wonderful time for all of us to get together. But again, COVID ruins everything. But we did a campaign for Father's Day. Is there Father's Day in Germany? I can't.
Yeah.
Okay, couldn't remember. So we did a campaign for Father's Day where we created some t-shirts for men. It says Men for ERA or Dads for ERA. And the goal was to do Instagram or Facebook posts of your brother, your husband, your dad, your granddad, etc. And to really talk about the fact that we need male allies, and that the men should be supporting the Equal Rights Amendment, because it will benefit obviously their daughters, their sisters, their wives, but it will benefit them. So we're seeing a lot more people who are out there. We've got organizations like AAUW, which is the American Association of University Women, obviously the National Organization for Women. This has been part of their platform for, 50-something years, right, Robbie? There's a lot of organizations that are speaking out now that probably didn't pay as much attention. And it's even part of the Democratic Party, the National Democratic Party's platform this year, to see the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th amendment to our Constitution.
And what about, there's a lot of movement also among younger women. There's a lot of issues that they care about that might be, when I talk to Jessica Neu, I just pronounce it in a German way, so Neuwirth. I don't know how you pronounce it in English, but she told me, she talked to these younger women, and they were so surprised that, the ERA is not part of the Constitution yet, right? Many people don't know about it, and many of them might think that, or might have a lot of other issues that they care about a lot, that are part of newer, younger women's movements. So how is that in North Carolina? Do you have coalitions that are, multi-generational, or how does that work? How do you see that?
There's a wonderful organization that was formed about a year ago called Generation Ratify, and it was actually started by a group of high school students in Virginia. We actually have a branch now in North Carolina, and Generation Ratify sits on the ERA Coalition's board. And one of the things that they're really good about doing is that outreach via social media primarily, because unfortunately even our colleges right now are going to be doing remote learning. But I think for a lot of people, when I go out and talk to younger people, there has been this sort of misconception the Equal Rights Amendment was ratified. And when you say, no, you're not in the Constitution, there's this, what? They don't know. In fact, we did last year, we had a billboard campaign across the state of North Carolina that basically states 4.2 million women in North Carolina don't have equal rights and under the Constitution. And there was this, because people don't know, they assume. And in our Constitution, women are only mentioned one time, and that is for the 19th Amendment. And really, it doesn't even say women; it says sex. So, but we look at the issues that younger people are interested in. We get a lot of questions around LGBTQ, and the Equal Rights Amendment, because it doesn't say women, it says sex. It's really forbids discrimination on sex, and it's that straightforward language that's really going to have the potential to protect all marginalized genders, including trans and sexual minorities. In fact, in some of the court cases over the last 20 years, both in the federal court and some of the district courts, they've concluded that if you're discriminating against a person because they're transgender, for instance, it amounts to sex-based discrimination. And so having an Equal Rights Amendment in our Constitution would give LGBTQ communities, it would give women who are fighting for equal pay or sexual harassment the ability to sue in federal courts under strict scrutiny guidelines, which is the same guidelines that you can sue if you're discriminated against based on your religion or you're discriminated against based on your race. And Jessica might have talked about that. That is when all women, whether they are gay, straight, bi, trans, will have that right to seek legal redress. I don't know, Robbie, do you want to add anything?
Well, I do think that the Equal Rights Amendment, once it becomes part of the Constitution, will also help men in a number of ways. One is if we can ensure equal pay for women who are doing the same job as men. Most of these women are in families, and most families need two incomes in order to take care of their kids and survive and have a decent life. And so that really helps men if the women the mother of the kids is also being paid equally. That's one thing.
What else is it that you can tell a man who is not convinced that this will help him?
Well, one other thing, we don't have a draft now, but if the draft should come back, this is an argument that some people find difficult. If the draft should come back, of course, women would be subject to the draft the same as men. That has not been true in the past, of course. But women are in the military now. Women are in combat. Excuse me. One of our senators, Tammy Duckworth, I think she's from Illinois. Tammy Duckworth was injured in Afghanistan fighting and lost both of her legs. Now she's now in the U.S. Senate. But, she said, if you could carry a 40-pound rucksack up the side of a mountain, if you could do this, if you can do that, then, I don't care if you're gay, straight, male, female, go ahead, do the job, and you ought to have equal rights. And I think more and more women are seeing it that way. So that is an argument that's been used against us, but I think it will help men to have an equal playing field.
Yeah. How many people would you say are active with the ERA in North Carolina?
Well, in our organization, just the ERA NC Alliance, we probably have about 80, 85 people that are what we call members. But then we have 13 lead organizations, and these lead organizations, they have membership. And so those organizations also have the Equal Rights Amendment as part of their platform. So it sort of expands outward. I think if you look at all the organizations together, we're probably 20,000 or more people across the state who are active.
So
and then
lead organizations like.
So there is a number of them. We have, of course, the National Organization for Women, the North Carolina branch, AAUW, the American Association of University Women. We have an organization called Women Advance, one that's called Women NC. We have, when Robbie started her own group of Ratify ERA North Carolina, so she started that initially with a website back, 10 plus years ago. There is a YWCA that's part of it, the Democratic Women of North Carolina. We've invited the Republican Women of North Carolina, but we haven't had any takers yet. Excuse me. I know there's a couple others I'm just blanking on right now.
So,
but it's
big organizations, yeah.
Right, yeah, good size organizations. And then we work with a lot of the universities. I have done several talks at the University of North Carolina, and we've also done some programs at Duke. We have reached out to several different states. In fact, this fall, there's going to be a campus outreach for the Vote Equality Initiative. And there's going to be RVs, recreational vehicles, the big ones, that are going to be going around North Carolina. I think they're going into South Carolina, Georgia, and then they're heading out to Arizona, Utah, and some of what we call the unratified states. And the goal is to get young people on college campuses excited, motivated, registered to vote, and educated on the Equal Rights Amendment. So we're going to be very involved in the North Carolina part of this.
Nice.
Just as much as we can do, given, again, COVID.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, if you have any videos to share from there, or, if there's an event at one of these universities that is live streamed, like, let me know. I would be very interested in
yeah, they'll be starting at the end of September. The idea is our election date is, as you're probably aware, is November 3rd. So you want to do this early enough to get people excited, but not too early that they forget. So most of our activities will be the end of September, in kind of through October across our state and then a bunch of the other states. So we're coordinating with the League of Women Voters. I'm sorry, that's one of our lead orgs. We'll be coordinating with them, and we have our own action committee that gets people in different counties across North Carolina to talk with their legislatures. And so we'll have those folks out. And we'll do as much as we can given potential restrictions, but we're hoping that we'll be congregating in places where students, even if they can't get into classes, they still go and have a coffee or something like that. So that's going to keep us pretty busy over the next month.
Yeah, because so originally I was planning to come to the US and research issues. So obviously that doesn't work, but that's why I'm trying to find some types of events where I can like watch from here and kind of get like a feeling, people talking to each other. That's more than just one-on-one interviews. So yeah.
Well, if we can actually get live people there, most of the time we do try and video. We take a lot of pictures, and when we can, we video. Our website has video from several of our events over the last few years, because we do try and make sure that we have that, since not everybody obviously can attend. And I hope Robbie's got that. Okay. But we can, I mean, I'm sure she'll jump on. We can continue whenever.
Yeah.
What other questions that you have?
I think, I mean, one more question was, so the whole issue with, I feel like there's currently a couple of roadblocks, I guess, the time limit, the archivist not doing it. Robbie is there, so I'm gonna let her in.
Okay.
I'm gonna start over once she's here. Hello. Hi.
You're still on mute. Can't hear you. There you go. So that every Zoom meeting, you're like, are we muted? Are we unmuted?
Yeah. Everybody is there. Yeah. So yeah, my question was, Roberta, also for you. So I feel like there's from my research, I see that there's a couple of pretty big roadblocks for the amendment to be, really added to the Constitution. One is the question around the time limit. The other one is the archivist not adding it. I guess these are connected. And then the third one is the Senate with currently a majority leader and Lindsey Graham. I forgot his title, but two important people who are very much against these issues. Unless, I mean, there is really a Democratic Senate, but that would be obviously solve a lot of problems. But what else are you hoping for? Like, what can you tell people who think that this is a lost cause anyway?
Well, one thing that we think will happen will be there will be a new makeup of the Senate. Maybe not drastic, but there will be some changes that will help. The other, and right now it seems to be blocked. The bill has passed the House, which would simply eliminate the deadline.
Yeah.
It's already passed a long time ago and has gone to the 38 states. But so what we're trying to get out of the Senate, and it may happen next year, is to eliminate the deadline.
Yeah.
Make that clear. At the same time, we have lawsuits pending that would require that the National Archivist go ahead and certify this last ratification. He has done it to the previous last two, and those were after the deadline. But because the U.S. Justice Department has blocked it and has said, the deadline prevents you from certifying this amendment, that has created a blockage there. So I think the lawsuits are also a good avenue, and our organization has participated in an amicus brief on each one of these two lawsuits. Of course, litigation takes a long time. It's very slow, but we think eventually we're going to win in that place as well.
Yeah, there are over 13 in other words, for ERA lawsuits, and I mean these are Jessica might have told you about them. I mean, these are youth organizations. These are states. The attorney generals, of course, in Nevada, Louisiana, Virginia are one of the original, people that fought for that. Women's organizations, academics, constitutional law professors. So I think with the Amici briefs, this is something that is powerful. And really the argument as to why the time limit is not as big of a limitation as people might think is part of our Constitution. Article 5 describes the ratification process and doesn't even mention time limits. And for like 130 years, there were no time limits attached to any amendments. They didn't even put a time limit on an amendment until the Prohibition, which is back when they were trying to get rid of alcohol in the U.S. Yeah. And they did that just because they hoped with a time limit it would just run out and they wouldn't have to have Prohibition. But one of the things we do know is that the guiding principles of our legislative branch is that one Congress cannot bind or limit the power of later Congresses. So they changed the ERA deadline once, They moved it from 79 to 1982. So if you think about it, it's possible for them to do it again, which is why we've seen that House resolution that Robbie mentioned. And they also rely in part on where that deadline or that time limit is located. And in the Equal Rights Amendment, it's in the preamble. It's not in the text of the actual amendment. It's not in the body. So there really is not a legal barrier preventing Congress from eliminating the deadline altogether and doing it retroactively. In fact, there hasn't even been a Supreme Court case that's ever cast doubt on Congress's power with respect to the timing of ratification, or that they lack the power to remove it. So we, as Robbie said, our fight will be to get a Senate that looks at this and says, yeah, absolutely, there's no reason why we can't remove the time limit, and then move forward. But again, we've got lawsuits, we've got briefs. As Robbie said, it's not going to be a slam dunk.
Yeah. And do you have a list of these lawsuits? Is there a list somewhere, or?
Yes. I mean, that is, would that be helpful if I sent those to you? Okay. I'll make myself a note.
It's not urgent, but if you find
it. Yeah, I'll get that to you today. Yeah, we've worked very closely with, we have a pro bono law firm, Winston Coberly, whose main offices are in Chicago, but they actually have one in North Carolina. And they do this work and have prepared the amici briefs, which, I mean, those are a lot of work, pages and pages and pages of arguments as to why. And we had one amici brief that had businesses, and the businesses that joined the brief, people like Apple, Citigroup, Google, Estee Lauder, Microsoft, Pepsi, Pfizer, Levi. I mean, these are companies that are international, as well as local. Twitter, Uber, they have signed on and have given reasons why, from a business perspective, as Robbie mentioned earlier, how are men going to benefit? From a business perspective, equal rights for women is going to benefit businesses as well. So we have a lot of friends out there. We've just got to get the legislative will.
Yeah. And if we move away from the Senate and the politicians up there, or also the state legislature in North Carolina, what would you say are your biggest enemies, or who are you fighting against? Like, are there still very active anti-ERA groups? Not that they're called like that, but anti-abortion groups, or who are the ones who are like really, you won't convince, but you need to like make them less supported?
Well, I'll defer some of this to Robbie because she's been fighting them, but there's two really good-sized groups. One is the Susan B. Anthony organization, which is, and that name infuriates me, since Susan B. Anthony, but they're primarily known as a anti-abortion group. So they're afraid that if the Equal Rights Amendment is put into the Constitution, that it would make abortion sort of on demand and forever legislated. And that's simply not accurate, because we have states that have the Equal Rights Amendment in their state constitutions. And some of these states have some pretty strict laws against a woman's right to an abortion. And as one of our advocates said, that we're not going to place abortion on the backs of women's rights, that these are separate issues. Abortion was decided under the concept of personal bodily freedom. It has nothing to do with equal rights. And then the other big group is the Eagle Forum. And that group is still very, very active. Phyllis Schlafly was...
Eagle Forum.
The Eagle Forum, yes. It was founded by Phyllis Schlafly and her son and I think daughter, Robbie. I know her son is still very active in it.
Her daughter is also.
Daughter. And they're against anything that in their mind would remove what they think of as protections for women. And honestly, there's not very many protections for women left. You know, alimony is sort of a thing of the past, and in states where alimony is around, they make a decision based on who the higher income earner is. I have a very good friend in California who had to pay her ex-husband alimony because she was the larger breadwinner. So yeah, there's things that have changed, just like with women in the military, with bathrooms. I mean, stuff that was really silly arguments back in the 70s that have just, this is just the way things are now. But there are still groups that say, nope, time limit ran out, and you do this, it's going to change the whole dynamics of the family. That family argument still raises its ugly head. Anything else you think of, Robbie?
I think the greatest opposition is from two things: ignorance and apathy. Ignorance, you know, and that is ignorance and apathy. I don't know and I don't care. You know, that's a lot of the problem. People are concerned about lots of other issues, and many of them don't even know that the ERA is still an issue. And you know, there was a national poll that showed 94% of Americans think, yeah, you ought to have equal rights in the Constitution, but 80% think it's already in there. So we have an ignorance problem, and then we have an apathy problem. You know, many people say, oh, you know, what the hell, we can't do anything about this. So I think it's those two things, as well as the Eagle Forum and the people who are actually antis.
Are they also very active?
In my mind, that's not as big a problem.
Are they also active in North Carolina, these groups?
Eagle Forum? I haven't heard much about them. Have you?
No, they're not as active as I would say the pro-ERA groups are. You'll occasionally see one of them interviewed, particularly if somebody's doing, like you are, doing an article about the Equal Rights Amendment, and you'll see someone interview them. We actually, in North Carolina, Robbie might have been 2 years ago, on one of our local public radio stations, there was an interview with our co-president about the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment in North Carolina, and there was a representative from the Eagle Forum. So it was one of those pros and cons.
Actually,
so that was
Phyllis Schlafly's daughter, who was on that program.
Wow. So occasionally you will see it, but there's not a group on the ground in North Carolina that's out there marching, protesting. Probably our biggest groups that are out there protesting are the ones that go to the clinics where women get abortions and stand there with their signs. Those are probably the most active groups in North Carolina, I think.
But they're not specifically fighting the ERA or?
No. I said in North Carolina, it's as much apathy as it is. Sadly, some of the legislatures just don't consider that a priority, including female legislators. They're like, oh, I'm good.
Why would you say it is a priority? I mean, just to, play this argument when people say, we don't really need it because through other means, we have these rights through legislative decisions, the 14th Amendment and so on, 19th Amendment, there is no, as you said, there is no benefits for women. There is maybe also no disadvantages necessarily legally codified. So why do you have some examples where you would say, okay, if the ERA passed this and this and this and this wouldn't be a problem anymore?
Oh, there are many, many examples. And of course, Jessica Neuwirth does a wonderful job in her book, Equal Means Equal, to lay those out. The thing we like to tell people is that the ERA addresses discrimination from a different perspective. It prohibits discrimination under the law, including in statutes and regulations and government employment and law enforcement. And it would enshrine those protections in the Constitution And this can't be changed as easily as other laws can. And what we see right now, for instance, we have a law that was signed by Joe Biden, who was one that brought this, called the Violence Against Women Act. And it is languishing in Congress right now because there hasn't been a will, sadly, from the other party to renew it. So every time we have a law or we have a regulation, these laws can lapse. The Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which was signed by President Obama, it lapsed.
What does that mean? Excuse me, to lapse? Like,
lapse means the law goes out of date.
I didn't know that
renewed.
I didn't know that existed. This is not not the case in Germany. I think once you have a law, it's there. I mean, you'd have to change the law, but
no, they have these laws and they'll go for so many years and then they have to be renewed. And many laws are just sort of renewed automatically. But in this case, it's very surprising. And the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act gave women the opportunity to sue when they learned about pay discrimination versus how the law used to be, is that you had to sue within something like 6 months of learning that you were paid wrong. And sometimes women are working at an employment for a decade before they find out. So that was part of it. But I think the biggest thing that we look at the Equal Rights Amendment doing is it will have a foundation in our Constitution where then the laws can be built on top of it. And if a woman needs to sue because she hasn't been paid fairly, she's been discriminated against, or she's been sexually harassed, or whatever the case may be, she can bring these lawsuits under strict scrutiny, just like, and I think I mentioned this earlier, race or religion. And right now, if a woman sues for any type of sexual discrimination, it is looked at only under intermediate scrutiny, which is much more difficult in a court of law to prove. Robbie?
Yeah, Linda Coberly, who is the lawyer who's handling the Equal Rights Amendment cases right now, the major case, she's with the law firm Winston and Strawn. Linda Coberly said that your chances of winning, if you have strict scrutiny, are about 80%. Your chances under intermediate scrutiny of winning that case are 50-50. So that makes a huge difference. And you were just mentioning, and I wanted to show this book, Equal. I keep it by me at all times. But the other thing is about equal pay. I think the Lilly Ledbetter Act would have been a better protection if we had had the Equal Rights Amendment. For example, in the case against Walmart, Walmart was sued by a group of women on a class action suit because they were being paid unequally by this giant corporation, and they were not given opportunities to advance in the same way that men were. That suit was lost, and it was a very sad loss.
What year was that?
Because the justices said that the people bringing the lawsuit had not proved intent to discriminate. Well, it's very hard to prove intent. And so that lost. And I think had we had the Equal Rights Amendment as part of the Constitution, I think the chances of that lawsuit winning for women would have been much better.
What year was this Walmart lawsuit?
I'm sorry?
What year was the Walmart lawsuit?
Oh, it hasn't been very many years ago. Do you recall, Lori?
No, but I think it was in the early 2000s. Isn't that weird to say that now, early 2000s? But yeah.
Pretty recent.
In the aughts, back in the aughts, as they.
It just doesn't have an index, so I can't look it up.
I know, it's like there's so many different ones. And one of the other questions I think you asked as well was around the 14th Amendment, because we hear this argument all the time. Oh, well, the 14th Amendment provides you protections. And the 14th Amendment actually, and this is so funny because I was looking for my pocket Constitution. But the 14th Amendment was designed for one thing, and that was to provide African American men citizenship rights, and that they would not be discriminated because they are citizens of the U.S. It is also one of the places in the Constitution where they very specifically call out men. So if the 14th Amendment protected women in the same way it was supposed to protect African American men, we wouldn't have had to have fought for the right to vote. So we didn't have suffrage. So again, the 14th Amendment is a very poor argument to state that women have equal rights in our Constitution based on that. Again, we had to fight. And in fact, African American women in this country didn't really have the ability to vote until the mid-60s with the Civil Rights Voting Act. So it's been a long, long road. Long road.
We're going to win. We're going to win.
We are going to win, yes. Nevertheless, we persist.
Yeah. Are there some key races in North Carolina that you're specifically worried or hopeful for, where you're like, okay, if these people or if this district is won, then we have a better chance? Oh, I mean, won by a person who supports the ERA rather than not?
I don't know, Robbie, if you want to comment.
I know of one race that we were interested in. Phil Berger, who is chairman of the Rules Committee, recently had to resign because of a scandal. So we won't have the same Rules Committee problem that we've had in the past. The Rules Committee is known as the place where bills go to die. And so we don't have that problem anymore. But I'm trying to think of other particular cases. Fortunately, I live in Western North Carolina, and we have a pretty progressive group of legislators in that part of the state. In some of the rural areas, it's much less so.
Yeah, North Carolina is unique, and there are 100 counties. And so, which I was just amazed when I realized that. I'm not a native of North Carolina, having grown up all over the U.S. and part of the world. So 100 counties, and you may have heard that we had this problem with gerrymandering. And gerrymandering has it set up where even if the population, even if 50% of the state's Democrat, 50% is Republican, the districts have been drawn so that there are more Republican districts, no matter how you slice and dice it. And the courts, of course, threw that out. And this year we got a few new districts that have been redrawn that we think are going to be competitive in the fact that there's a good chance a Democrat could win where it was always held by a Republican. And so that is one reason why North Carolina is being looked at. But the biggest thing that I think we're being looked at is our Senate race. And as Robbie talked about earlier, if the U.S. Senate flips, then there is a possibility that we're going to see that resolution to remove the time limit pass. And so we've got a very competitive race right now between Senator Tom Tillis, the incumbent, and a former North Carolina General Assembly Senator Cal Cunningham. And that's
What's the second name?
Cal Cunningham.
Okay, so they both have a alliteration in their names. Interesting.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Yep. So we've actually done, this is another little tidbit that we have worked on this year, is we've done Equal Rights Amendment presentations to Senator Tillis's chief of staff, as well as Senator Richard Burr, our other senator, who's not up for re-election this year, and apparently he's not going to run, but to his chief legal counsel. And we've also had discussions with Cal Cunningham's staff. I was actually on a Zoom call with Cal Cunningham, and I asked him flat out, I said, so if you are elected, will you support removing the time limit from the Equal Rights Amendment in the Senate? And he said, absolutely. He said, he says, I think it's shameful that North Carolina has not ratified. So we know that he would be a strong advocate for us. And, you know, we have a governor's race as well. North Carolina is a very strange state in that the governor and the lieutenant governor can be from different parties. And so we have a Republican lieutenant governor and a Democrat governor, and they're running against each other for the election. North Carolina, we do fun stuff here.
That's the most interesting part to me, and that's, I think, what's also very difficult to explain to our German audience is how different. I mean, we have the same. Obviously, we're also a federal state, and
right.
But I think the rules are still a little more uniform, you know.
Yeah.
In the different states, and obviously, one thing I try to do with this topic is to shift the perspective a little bit away from just the presidential race, because that's what everybody talks about, and I want to know what else is going on during this year, you know. So
yeah, well, there's a strong feeling among, I think, most people in this country, and we do get caught up in the president race because that's the glamour, you know, that's the big thing. But the reality is, if a president is elected from one party and the Senate and the House are of a different party, it makes it very difficult for that president to do anything. And we saw that very clearly in President Obama's last 4 years. He had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, and his hands were tied quite often. So we know that if, for instance, Joe Biden wins the Democratic ticket or wins the presidency, if his Senate is still Republican, he's going to have some challenges in getting some things done, because legislation has to be, we're just so partisan now. It's really hard to get anything out that's really going to help the American public. It's a sad thing. I mean, you're seeing this right now with the COVID relief. You know, people are like this, and we shouldn't be. This is for American citizens.
Yeah. Okay, let me check my notes. What else I wanted to ask, because so much already talked about, but yeah, maybe this question of you talked about the unratified states. Is there a larger coalition of the ERA alliance, or what state are you particularly maybe working together with? Who are you hoping who else could ratify quickly?
You know, it's interesting. So, of course, most of the southern states, sadly, I know Virginia was like a beacon, because Virginia obviously has spent a lot of their years on the wrong side of history, as we all know. But the majority of the southern states are still not ratified. And then we have states out west, like Utah and Arizona, who have very active coalitions. Minnesota has a very active coalition. And there's a small group of us, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, that have formed a sort of a subgroup. We call ourselves the Southern Coalition. To talk about, really, it's almost like sharing the wealth. We have similar situations in that we have legislatures that are dominated by a party who's not interested in seeing the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. Our senators are not willing to speak up in the U.S. Senate, and so we get together probably about once a month, and it's really brainstorming and sharing ideas. And this Vote Equality Tour will be going through those states as well, to kind of engage the youth outreach.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And maybe one more question for you, Roberta, which I forgot to ask previously, was when you compare your activism in the first round, you know, of the ERA, and now, what is different? What has changed? What is easier, and what has maybe become more difficult?
Well, what has changed for the better certainly is that we have a lot more women involved, and some men involved as well. I think our ERA North Carolina Alliance is very well organized. We have some real talent. Lori is one, but we have some other outstanding women and some men who are involved in that. I think back in the early days when I was working for ERA in Louisiana, we were not very well organized at all. And partly because we thought it's going to be easy. We're going to go right through. And we're older and wiser now.
Why did you think it was easy? Was there more momentum?
Well, how could anybody be against equality for women? I couldn't conceive that someone would be against that. But I was so naive. I was young. I didn't know any better. And we know now. And I think we are very well organized. And I think we also have support from some of the major people in Congress and in the legislature that we need.
Well, and there is this wonderful thing, as we have seen in protests and uprisings, the ability of social media to get people organized and activated. And I think at one of our first or second meeting, Robbie, that was it you or somebody had brought letters and documents from the early 70s when everything had to be done via the phone, or you had to mail letters to people to let them know, hey, we're going to have a rally on such and such date and you need to be out here. It's, I think for all of us who've been watching all the documentaries on the women's suffrage movement back in the early 1900s, to think about how they got people out there to march and to be activists. So that, I think, makes it a little easier in some ways, but on the other hand, we're also fighting against so much noise on other fronts. This year, I mean, we're still dealing with our issues of racism, and we've had so many strong African American women who have been fighting for equal rights, and who tell us they're fighting almost on two fronts. They're fighting against systemic racism and systemic sexism, and these women are, I mean, they're the backbone in many ways of the Democratic Party, but they're the backbone for the fight for the Equal Rights Amendment. It is not, and we have several women of color that are on our board. Our chief bill sponsor in the House, in the North Carolina House, Representative Carla Cunningham, is an African-American woman. Our former, he's no longer a senator, but one of our first bill sponsors in the North Carolina General Assembly in the Senate, Senator Floyd McKissick, also African-American male, and with a long history of fighting for civil rights. So we look at it as being very intersectional, that we have to have, we've got to have our people of color, our Latinx, our Hispanic, Asian Americans, African Americans. We need our LGBTQ allies, and we need young people. We need people like Robbie and me out there fighting, and we need men. We need men to stand up and say, as my husband, I have a picture of my husband in his dad's for ERA shirt, and says, he's got a daughter and he has a granddaughter he adores, and he wants her to have every opportunity that his son has had, that his, her stepbrother will have. And that's what we need. We've got to have the men as allies.
Yeah. Sorry, I just lost my one question that I still had. It'll come back to me. It's just when I focus on all of this. I think I did some research. I read how often the ERA has actually been defeated in the state Senate. I mean, it's just incredible that you keep going. I'm just year after year. And yeah, it's.
Well, there was a time in North Carolina. This is before I lived here, because I've only been here for 11 years. But there was a time when the Equal Rights Amendment came up, and it lost in our state Senate by only 2 votes. Those were the days.
Yeah.
So we want to get back to that. We used to be a lot more progressive, as I said.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, at least you're optimistic that this can change. You know, a lot of people probably have lost hope and they see the US as this like very polarized country with the more conservative southern states, and yeah, but I feel like there's a lot of things happening everywhere, you know, and a lot of people who don't accept that.
Yeah, we're trying to overcome ignorance and apathy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That describes it nicely, Robbie. Ignorance and apathy.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much for the time and for talking to me. I feel like I got a little glimpse into North Carolina. I've actually been to Durham, but
Oh, wonderful.
like 5
Black
years ago.
Mountain. Come and visit Black Mountain in the mountains. It's beautiful.
Okay, I hope
have a guest
soon
room.
they will let me in and I can come.
That's right. They won't let you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was supposed to be, like I said, I've been in Europe. I was in Europe twice last fall, 2 different trips. Part of those was I went to the Christmas markets. And so I was in Cologne and some of the more of the southern German states for Christmas. And I have German ancestry, and it's, you know, I love Europe, and it just broke my heart this year that I can't go. I have a girlfriend in Stockholm, and she told me, she said, well, you could come to Stockholm because you know me. So said they would let you into the country. And I said, oh, okay. But, you know, I want to come back and visit other areas and do this. Yeah. So
it's a strange year.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah. If I have any questions, maybe I'll write you if I want to maybe talk to any of the legislatures on the state level that you mentioned, because I think that could also be interesting. Maybe you can connect me
Sure.
with people who are, you know, on your side. And yeah, and if you can send me those the list of the lawsuits. I don't know how much
absolutely.
I'm able to include it because it's quite specific. But
yes,
you know, I want to get an
there's
overview.
a lot. There's a lot there. What I'll try and do is send you just the top line overview. I won't send you the actual lawsuits unless you're just really wanting them, because those things are they're like 40. They're 40 pages. Your mailbox will explode.
Yeah, and I will send you the video probably through WeTransfer.
Okay.
Usually very large files. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we appreciate this, and it's been such a pleasure talking with you. And I hope we shed a little light on our fight. And you know, I don't know if you have heard this, but Elizabeth Warren, who, as you know, was running for presidency and has been a very strong fighter for equal rights. She was censured by Senator McConnell in the Senate. And he told her to sit down, and he told her to be quiet. And then he says, but nevertheless, she persisted. And so this is something that we say over and over again about women, is that nevertheless, she persisted, and we do persist.
Yeah, I can see that. All right. Well, have a good day and good fight for the next weeks and months.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate it. You take care.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Yeah.